I think we all can agree, at least we will assume, that the Las Vegas Convention Center is still a flat building and not suddenly undulated or something and have a topography on top of it. It's still a flat building, right? So this cannot be isolines representing the TEM. What we see here is actually motion. This space here on the Las Vegas Convention Center, they are caused by motion. The Las Vegas Convention Center is moving, and in this case here, it's mostly moving because of the temperature difference. So it's a very huge building. What is happening when a building gets warmer, when the outside temperature is changing, is that it's getting larger, right? So the Las Vegas Convention Center here is getting a little bit larger from spring towards summer, and that leads to deformation here of a couple of centimeter, probably 1.5 centimeter, something like that, along the building. This is something civil engineers know very well, right? Buildings are constructed to accommodate for this motion, and you can also see that here in the Las Vegas Convention Center, as you can see some building parts here or here which are separating this motion. So there are parts of the building, they are designed to move closer together or separate from these temperature changes. Also, if you drive over large bridges, you will see that there is some gaps sometimes between parts of the bridge which are there to allow the bridge to grow and shrink also from the heat and other influences. So this is very common civil engineers to know that. I'll show you that to show you the small amount of deformation that we can measure this interferometry, because we are talking here about something like centimeter. So certainly you will not see that motion this year. As if you stand there, it's a very small, growing over time and shrinking from the heat. It's not something you can see with your eye. But we can from space measure that very, very precisely. And that's what we are doing with differential interferometry. We are looking at very small changes in the surface, deformation of the surface, deformation of building, be it from the heat, like in this case, or be it from groundwater pumping, or whatever else, well, seismology, tectonics, volcanology, all of these changes in the surface motion, right? We are looking at that, okay, and we can do that with very high precision, as I showed you here, with that example here. So let me move on here. So what are we looking at? So if we have these two scatterers, right, we are coming to the displacement, the phase, the range difference between the two, we can again calculate. It's the same equation.
By the wavelength times the range difference. Now, when we are looking at example we are building with a triangle, and we're saying, well, there's a topographical difference between two pixels and an angular difference between them, and we can then form, again, it's a trigonometric solution that we form to get towards the height. In terms of deformation, the logic then is much more simple, right? The range difference that we see is just caused by the motion. The motion will lead to a range difference, right? Because the distance changes, so you have a change in distance from the motion. Very, very straightforward, the logic behind that. Right? So the phase caused by the displacement
Cô bấm một cô đứa nào đấy?
Ai đánh là đấy cô? Trời ơi, nhà tụi con có 2 cái bóng nè. Đây con con.
By the movement, by the scattered displacement, right? They're not divided into four. Now both effects, don't forget that both effects, surface motion,
Ai đây là nghỉ hả cô? Cô này.
they
Cô.
come at the
Cô.
same
Well,
time,
teacher.
right? They come together into
Teacher
one
ơi, nào cô? Teacher.
the atmosphere.
Teacher.
Học thì có tẹo đó trời. Học phải được nhiều nhiều chứ.
They have to separate
Làm xong 2 tờ này với lại làm trong vở một ít nữa nó nghỉ.
Thầy đố đây là gì?
Xong không?
creating a
Vào của chị Su, vào của con. Đi không?
motion, surface motion.
Khẩu trang đâu trời ơi. Hai thằng cha này kìa, chú về chú la ra kìa.
Alright, now we have face
Hello,
contribution
chú.
that is not caused by the height, by the topography. It's caused
Muộn
by
quá. Anh ơi, chạy lên tài liệu cô có mấy tờ về A3 để nó quay chú cô độ. Cục đi.
Ba xong nói với mẹ anh đang
taking
ở
both images at the same
Gọi nó
time.
mày đâu? Nói chuyện với ai mà mãi
You
không
also
xong?
won't have a surface motion contribution.
Có vụ gì không? Cái gì đó?
Nothing to worry about.
Đó.
But if they have different time, you may have surface motion contribution.
Bây giờ hả?
And if we're interested in the motion, we want to remove or reduce the influence of the topography. And we want to get rid of that and only look at motion. So we will think about how to do that. So we have
Ngoài là tiết của kênh là tiết chuyên kỳ cô là tiết toán.
taking of the topography,
Thầy dạy toán.
motion, the atmospheric delay, and some noise and
Cô là thầy dạy toán, cô mỹ thuật đó là kỹ thuật. Và 1/2 cộng 1/2
À A3 nghe chưa? A4 đâu?
topography. We can look
A4
at
nhỏ
the
xíu
noise.
ạ. A4 nhà cô có mà.
We remove the topography and the atmospheric delay. We can
Không,
look at
A1 thì
emotion.
bằng cái bảng tư kìa.
When we want to look at the topography, we want to remove
Còn A1 thì bằng cái bảng. Còn A0 thì bằng cái
There's also some research
quá to rồi.
where
Một
look
cái
at
to
the
đó,
atmosphere
mẹ hết 10
delay.
ngày.
We want to analyze
10
that.
năm.
So we try to remove the topography and the motion and also
Ba
look
màu.
at the atmosphere.
Ngũ màu,
Learn more
rồi
about the atmosphere.
tiền màu, nước. Sao em không nhét cái đó?
So whatever is
Ghép
your
gạo nó vô luôn.
signal, what you expect, right? You're going to try to remove the other part.
Anh ơi, A3 nghe chưa?
So that is
Rồi, đi đâu rồi?
the idea, right? We have
Vâng, bút
in
viết
your
vợ.
face
Đi đấy.
this information of topography, motion, atmosphere. And to analyze,
Đếm lại số tiền hôm
we
nay
have
hay là kiếm
to
được bao nhiêu
separate
rồi?
the different
Bao nhiêu mình kiếm được?
and also very important, the last sentence, the motion is measured.
Chẳng nhiều lắm.
The line of sight direction of the sensor. So when here's our sensor,
Ông chơi với con nữa.
this direction.
Ông quên.
There is also the motion, the direction of the motion that we measure. And that is our measurement vector.
Phát thì phải lo làm bài con.
250
Tiền nó bao nhiêu đấy?
That we do measure.
250 rồi,
Our
150 rồi,
result is one
310.
motion
Thì
between
310, 350 nữa.
Very good.
150, 150 là
Alright, so how we do that?
200,
Now,
200,
in different ways, but
200 rồi.
generally two main ways. We want to remove.
A3 anh ơi. A3.
So the idea is if you remove the topography, we see the motion.
Ủa,
They're going to have to be in this atmosphere.
Ủa, chứ có 2 tờ 50 mà.
So there are two ways.
Có cả
One
con
is
rồi.
called two-pass itself. For that,
Đừng có vô thêm một tờ nữa.
so we have our interferometric pair.
300,
We have a DEM.
được 300.000 rồi cô.
We remove the topographic phase by using the DEM. We simulate the DEM.
310.
Ở đâu vậy? Ăn trộm
Tiền
bố
tiết
mẹ.
kiệm của con ơi. Em là nhiều nhất,
What would now the
220.
topographic phase look like?
Viết đi.
Right, if we know the satellite's position, we know the DEM. We can calculate the phase and the
320,
position.
320.
Right.
Nhiều quá. Con ơi lại đi con. Nhớ con.
That means that for each pixel we have the topographic phase, right, simulated from the DEM, and we remove that. And what's left, well, is then the motion of the atmosphere plus
Thế rồi. Để
Ủa?
lại nó bay
DEM
đi.
error,
Ba
because
trăm
our
này.
DEM is probably not
200
perfect,
nè.
so there's going to be some errors.
360 nè.
The other method is
70
we
nè.
have three
Đưa đến rồi.
images,
120
called
nè.
three
Gì
parts.
vậy? Con đang đếm giữa chứ mà mày đếm lại cho tao
So
coi
we
nghe.
from the other image pair.
320 ngàn rồi, mua nãy
So
giờ
we
đúng rồi.
estimate their topographic trace from A and B, and then we remove each point piece in that example. Now that gives us often a little bit better results, but there's a big issue with it. So
Đấy là đổi với cô Thư
it
ra
works
là
best
đóng
under
vào
the
luôn.
assumption that in one image file,
50
A, B,
đổi ra
and then
2 tờ
example,
2
there is no motion.
rồi còn đổi lên rồi 10 ngàn nữa.
So we use three-part insight mostly for events
Cô ơi,
like
cô ơi.
a singular motion event. Like, for example, an
Không cho
earthquake.
người ta
If
khử.
you have an earthquake,
Cho cô Thư.
then you would use an
Dạ
image
vâng.
pair from before the earthquake or after the earthquake for the
Khử.
topographic base, and then a pair of images between these two
Ê
images
cô, có 2
that
tờ của cô
happen
đổi cho con 2 tờ
to
10
get
ngàn
the
này.
motion phase.
Không.
Right.
Anh đưa
So,
vở đây.
in that case, it works very well. It does not work so well
Nghĩ
if
là
you have
chịu không?
continuous motion. Right? You have a motion that
2 tờ 10 ngàn.
will be in both images.
Ôi,
And then you need to
hôm nay học
you
nghiêm
also
túc
do we
không?
look at
Qua
the
đợi
baseline.
khá là hôm nay phải
So
nghiêm
we
túc.
take for if we look at the in AB, so if we look at the topographic base, we take ideally an image with a rather large baseline, so the topography is amplified, and we want the baseline for the motion phase, the perpendicular baseline to be rather small, so the topography is not amplified. If we are not looking at the topography, if we're looking at the
Cái
motion,
gì đó?
right?
Dạ. Mua cái mới hả?
Motion component of the motion
Ngày
between
mai mua, ông Thanh mới.
these two is identical.
Hay nó cứ chảy nước này,
Which
thì
is
nước này.
large baseline, small baseline.
Nó gặp gì vậy?
Our ground is moving, it doesn't matter if we are
Mày hết rồi.
very close together or more far away. Like there is no, not going at the effect
Sách kia để đó mà học nghe chưa?
or finding any triangles like in this motion. It will be the same even if we have zero distance here between both images. The motion will still be there. So if you're looking at motion, we want a rather small baseline.
Tiền này để là tổng cộng nha.
Have
Không có làm
less
gì nữa, bà
topographic
cả nha. Theo ông bà của anh hai ngày xưa nói, bỏ tiền trên vở chứ.
smaller baselines than for topographic and actually with larger baselines. And if you do three-part pizza, that should also be reflected in the images that you choose, and then you get better results.
Vở là nơi thúc
Okay.
đẩy trí óc của mình.
So two-part insights maybe the more.
Ê, chưa nói xong mà.
Ủa, có in cái mỏ chưa? In cái mỏ chưa?
Vở là nơi
On the
cất
left
giữ
side
trí óc
is
của
the
mình.
interferogram.
Tiền là nơi
Then
trước
you
ở
put
của
in
mình
some
xây.
image
Vừa
again.
rồi xây vừa rồi.
Interferogram on the right
Ơ,
side.
đây mới là chân giữa.
Simulated base
Nó chiếm hết á.
based on the
Nó bỏ
TM.
hết nhiên liệu ở đây hết rồi.
TM we simulated base, and then we take the left interferogram and we subtract the right one we simulated interferogram to get two emotions. Here another example then. On top we have the
Hôm bữa con
real
thấy ông mới vừa
interferogram.
mẹ mới vừa anh hai mới vừa
Simulate
ba đi mua
TM
Vin.
that's on the
Ba
bottom
vừa
is
chạy
telling
chưa
you
được 5 phút ba đặt về. Có cái 3 phút
the
lúc
top
đó
minus the
mẹ đi
bottom
theo
then
mẹ
real
kêu mẹ sợ
interferogram
mẹ
minus
mẹ
the
ba lái xe
telling
luôn
interferogram,
con xe luôn
and we get
Oàn nó này đèn đỏ sáng được đèn đỏ
the
chạy trâu quá
one
chạy trâu
interferogram
con
minus
nhớ không đi xe đạp không bởi vì mẹ chửi nè hàng
interferogram,
ngon và xanh
and
á
then we are
ba
left
mà
with
giờ bị đánh chửi đỡ còn cái kiếp này nè thì giảm cướp chó căng như không đó
of interpretation.
ơi mở to lên chút được không chân nghe
We have here some fringes here along. That's probably rather
ui thơm quá
the
à bông nhớ
arrows,
hồi nãy phút lợi
and
vừa
because
vui nghe
our TM is not perfect.
à thì đây đây đi
And we also probably have some motion elements here.
The difficulty now is that
nghe
we
cái
need
này là không thích lắm này cô con nghe để
to separate, right?
cô cái máy tính này nhà em nó cô mà nó chỉnh tiếng Anh
What
này
is an error from the TM? Because the TM is not perfect.
em á em
So the simulation is not perfect. Right? So you're gonna have some errors from the DEM, which are often more related to the mountain tops of the valleys, where where the DEM difference, the difference between the DEM and the reality is rather large. And you have to look at where is the motion, and there is still the atmosphere left, which is typically a long wavelength. So probably you see on the left side, from the left side to the right side of the picture, you see a bit a change in color, like from yellowish to a bluish, so a change in phase. That longer wavelength, that longer frequency here along, that's probably more related to the atmosphere, like a slow shift over the image. This is rather atmospheric. The problem is now in the interpretation. Right? We have the measurements, but how to interpret them, you see, it's not that easy, even in that rather beautiful and simple example that I show you here. Again, here, Etna volcano. We have here the interferogram, the simulated DEM, the interferogram simulated with the DEM, and then differential interferogram, so the true measurement minus the simulation, and you get here the rest of the phase components. You see some noise, and the phase components rather related to motion from the volcano, uplift and subsidence of the volcano. And that's in principle how it works, right? It's rather straightforward. You get your interferogram, you simulate the DEM, and then you subtract them from the model. And if you do that, then you end up with something like that, where you then can say, here is the emotion. And if you go to conferences or you read papers, you will rather often see results like that, and where then the presenter says, and clearly we can see the motion here in the city center. Very important part of such a presentation, mainly what is a very important part of such a presentation, is this arrow here, right? To make sure that you're looking here. Okay. Why? Because if you don't look there, you may come up with lots of questions, right? You may see, and what's that? Is that also deformation? Or here, or what? Sorry, like what are these structures? What are these structures? Yeah, he does not like me. 1 second. Okay. Sorry, 1 more second. Okay. What did I say? What are these structures here? Typically, the people doing the presentation, writing the paper, they also don't know. Okay. That's the problem. The problem of the user is that you get a very precise measurement. You get the deformation also very precisely in your interferogram. The measurement is there, but the interpretation is difficult. Interpretation of it, right? Because you still have atmosphere in it. You have a DEM error in it, right? And so now you need to separate that from the motion signal, which is easy if you know where to look, right? If you know, well, around here there should be motion, right? But otherwise, it's not that easy to find the motion, and it's a huge problem of differential interferometry at the end is the interpretation. And so you see many slides like that, where you can only see what you should see by people really pointing to that, right? And making it as subset of the image. to make sure that we only look at that part of the image. And that's the problem that we are having here. Right? It's a very famous and beautiful example here from the farm earthquake in Iran, where you can see the motion from the earthquake very well. That's an example. Earthquakes are typical example where differential interferometry works very well. That here is now a 3 pass DINSA. So there's 3 images, 1 image pair for the photography taken before the earthquake, and the co-seismic image pair, where 1 image is before the earthquake, 1 image is after the earthquake, and the interferogram between them. And that's also very famous, but also very beautiful example where we don't have so much noise, only where we can see the deformation very clearly. It's also because there is not so much vegetation there, so we do not have so much temporal decorrelation, which helps us in getting good result. And if you now want to analyze the result again, you can use the software to unwrap also the deformation phase, or you could just count how many phase cycles are there. Start from blue. So 1, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, close to 6 phase cycles, and from that you can calculate the deformation each phase cycle is then half of the wavelengths in deformation. So you can calculate them 6 times 2.6 or something centimeter. That would be the deformation overall, and you can also unwrap the faces here automatically to get you to a better measurement than just counting. So that's basically how it works. And then that's a nice example, 3 pass DINSA here on an earthquake. In that case, there is not so much discussion on the different phase components. In that case, we see it very nicely. There's another example of a differential interferogram, in this case for landslide detection, and I like that slide very much. It's a beautiful result, and it also shows you all the problem I just mentioned. It's a very typical slide. Again, you see the author of that slide. He did make a nice box around that landslide that you should look at to make sure that you only look here, where we actually see that landslide here, the motion in the landslide here, very nicely. It's a very beautiful result. But again, if you would look in other directions, what about here? Here are these landslides. Most probably these are actually DM errors in that area. We're pretty sure about that, but you don't really know so sure. That one is probably landslide motion here. You can see it is a Badu. That's an urban area that is actually moving. That one is probably also motion, but you would not be so sure. Right? So there's errors from the DM and atmosphere and noise and motion all mixed in it. So the interpretation is very difficult. But I also like to show that slide because that's also something we do, right? Something you don't know. There's several Alos pulsar images of that area available. Also during the time that landslide is moving. But only that example we see so much. So many interferograms where you actually see nothing, or you just see the little bit but not so clear. So what can happen is, you take the best image, you put it in a slide, and you go to your conference or you publish it in a paper. But the reality is that there are actually images where you do not see them. And there is nothing really wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. Only what I want to point out for you, as some of you are just beginning with it, just students of it, And all you see these, these nice slides, the nice examples in the papers and in the books. Again, I don't even have a slide for the one which doesn't work. Right? But just know that often it does not work. You often do not see that answer. You often do not see what you're looking for. Right? In that. And you probably did nothing wrong. Okay, I think that's the unfair part of it, that we show always these nice results that sometimes then, especially in the beginning, many students I know that then get confused or frustrated, right? Because they do not get this nice result here, and they do not see that beautiful result. And they don't know that it's more common probably to not see it, or that maybe you need to reprocess it, or it's just not in that image pair, you need another image pair, right? That's the problem that I would have with it. Right? There are often cases where it doesn't work, where you do not see so nice results, and that's okay. Even the bigger problem is sometimes you may have supervisor or bosses, who also went to the conference and saw the beautiful slides and really do not understand why that student of mine is not getting it so beautiful. Okay. And the poor guy did probably nothing wrong, it's just not there. He cannot get it out of the data if it's not there. That's what I want to explain to you, that this is, and the examples I show you, these are always the beautiful examples. And the reality, especially with the INSA, is often much more noisy, messy, and sometimes you have, you don't really see the results that you want because of the correlation, or the angle is a bit different. Or at that time, landslides, they are not always moving. Right? They are sometimes moving faster, sometimes they almost stop. So, you get now an image pair covering a time where the thing almost didn't move. What are you going to do? So, that's what I think is very important for you to understand. If you do that kind of processing, do not always expect you will get such nice results. That's rather the exemption. I think we have like 10 interferograms or something like that where you see nothing. Or very, a little bit, but very noisy. Only one to show that landslide so clear. Alright, another example here of the INSA at the Kunming airport. So, airports and other infrastructure elements for airports, they have to make sure that they're not subsiding, right? You do not want to have a subsiding runway, right? That is not safe. That's something you do not want. So it's quite common for them to use, next to, for sure, GPS and level measurement, to also have INSA there to monitor the whole airport, the larger area, right? And that's one example of, at the new Kunming airport now, it's not so new anymore. That slide, I don't know, maybe literally is 10 years old or something. What they did when they built that new airport in Kunming is they had to cut the whole mountain here in that area. So there was a mountain there. So that mountain was moved away to be able to build the airport. Right? That was necessary. So obviously a huge engineering project. Now what happened when the company tried to do then the INSA at the Kunming airport is that they found when they take the it's already red marked. Right? There's not motion, obviously. They want to see motion. That's what they see. Is this space inside here, and that is DEM error. Right? It's an error of the DEM. Why? Because in the DEM, that mountain is still in the DEM. Right? So the DEM is wrong at that point. That mountain has been removed. But what you do then is you simulate that whole
Hôm nay có mấy
the
bài đó mà
phase
lắm
of
rồi
the
đó.
ATM. You remove that from the interferogram. But
Nhanh ơi.
now the DM is wrong, right? You remove now the wrong topographic phase. So you have basically a negative topographic phase overlapping your airport, and you can't get any deformation information because you are dominated by the topographic phase, by the topographic error, right? That's what we mean by DM error. If your DM is this very extreme example, typically it's much smaller area errors, okay? But your DM is not as good, right? There's always errors in it. You simulate the DM more wrong, like in this example, or less wrong. You will have not a perfect simulation, not a perfect representation of the reality of the topography, and so you have DM errors, right? That's an extreme example of a DM error here. Now the solution to that is, right, this is you see that here, example here, see that here, this is the DM error, right here. Shown that mostly you see the phase from the DM error. The solution to the problem was making a new DM, right, using INSA to make a new DM, and then use that DM, the new DM, to remove the phase, and to do that, see after they use a DM now this time using KHÄI to create first a DM, right, and then take that DM and remove, take that DM to remove the simulated topographic phase and then remove it. Then you can see the deformation much more clear. It also shows that here some that this using INSA here, but that is actually useful because we see the different deformation. Some of the deformation is also a bit outside of the airport, outside of the runway. And that's the kind of deformation that you do not see when you have your GPS measurement, right? You have your points measurement. You probably sometimes have leveling measurements along the runway. But the deformation next to the runway, you often miss them because you don't have a measurement point there. Now, if we catch this deformation who are not yet at the runway, if we catch them early, okay, we can repair them and fix the problem before the problem reaches the runway. And that's the goal, right? Because if we need to repair it after the runway is affected, we need to repair the runway. If we need to repair the runway, we need to have a construction on the runway. If we need to have a construction on the runway, we can't use that runway for a certain amount of time. Economically spoken, we now lose money. If we, on the other hand, see the deformation before it reaches the runway, we have the chance to deal with it before it actually reaches the runway, right? And we can have easily a construction site next to the runway. Right? That does not really affect us very much. So that's why this area, this measuring the deformation with INSA is very important, even if they have very good leveling and GPS measurements on the airport. That area view covering the whole area is still very important for that, because you want to catch also deformation sources that did not reach the runway or building parts yet. This is the important point, not yet. And then it's even easier to fix. Okay, that was that example here. Okay. Now, but we still have the atmosphere in our differential interference. So the atmosphere is an effect that influences our interferograms and especially the differential interferograms because we have a time difference in it. If we have a time difference in it, the weather is changing, we have an atmospheric difference in it. Okay. Right. Okay. Now the atmosphere has its own properties. Okay, so the atmospheric phase delay has its own properties. For example, one is written here. It is independent of the baselines. So the atmospheric effect is independent if you have larger baseline or shorter baseline. That doesn't matter to the atmospheric phase delay. That's independent of it. Keep in mind that we're talking here still at they're still very close together, right? So if we have the satellite being, let's say, 800 kilometers away, okay, our satellites, the baseline of our satellite is probably something like 400 meters. So you have, if you imagine your triangle, right, you have something like 400 meter baseline and 800 kilometer distance here. So we are talking from looking very much from the same direction, right? There's not a huge angular difference in it. So your atmosphere is pretty much the same. So they're independent of the baseline. And the atmosphere is also changing slowly in space, right? So from one pixel to the next, the atmosphere is going to slowly change. If you walk out and it's raining and you're walking for 50 meters or 100 meters, most probably it's still raining. Right? It's typically not that you have rain, you walk 100 meters and you have no rain, then you walk 100 meters again and you suddenly have rain again. Right? That may happen, right? But it's very unlikely, and typically what you're going to have is slow changes of the atmospheric conditions in space. So we say the atmospheric phase delay is related in space. So from one pixel to another, we expect slow changes, smooth behavior, if you want, right? While in time, that may not be. Why? Because in time we're talking about. We're not talking about minutes difference, where typically the satellite comes back after days. So you're going to have to assume that after 10 days there is no relation between them in time for the atmosphere anymore. And this knowledge on the behavior of the atmospheric-based term, we're going to later use to remove that. Right? So, the different properties of the atmospheric phase, the topographic phase, and the motion phase, we're using that to, right? So the atmospheric phase is independent of the baseline. The motion phase is also independent of the baseline. The phase of topography, the component caused by topography, depends directly on the baseline. So if you have multiple baselines, if you have many images with different baselines, you can already start to separate those things. So let's take a look at the phase contributions, right? We have the contribution from the flat Earth. That one is easy to remove, okay? We have the contribution from the elevation, from the elevation side with topography. We have the contribution from the displacement. We have the distribution from the atmosphere, where we do not have such a nice equation for it, right? And we have some noise on top of it. And we want to separate those, right? We want to separate the elevation from the displacement. The flat phase is relatively easy to estimate and to calculate. So we are basically left with elevation, displacement, atmosphere, and we want to separate them from each other, and we're doing that by looking at the different behaviors and properties of them. And here you see, for example, one important is this one here, this one. That's the baseline. So the elevation, the phase of the elevation depends on the baseline, while the displacement does not depend on the baseline. You don't see a baseline here. And the atmosphere does also not depend on the baseline. So that's going to help us to separate them. And the goal is, our goal onward is to separate them so that we know the elevation or the elevation error, if we already looked at here, that we know the displacement and that we are able to remove the atmosphere for better measurements, so that we do not have to rely on looking at these phases and trying to interpret them. Where is motion, what is motion path, what is DM error, and how they all come together. We do not like to interpret them, because interpreting them is not easy. I try to explain that a bit with some of the slides, that's not going to be very easy to really interpret them, and there's lots of errors, and you end up in just trying to paint and show, okay, here's the deformation, and you have to ignore all the errors around it, and you have also told basically your audience to know. So keep these interface contributions in mind. They're going to be important because we're trying to separate them later on. Now again, I mentioned that we are measuring our deformation here in the line of sight direction. So we have a one-dimensional measurement. So we measure in one direction, in the direction our signal is traveling. So like the distance difference in that direction is what we measure. However, typically we're not interested in the distance difference in that direction. We want to know, is it moving up or down, or is it moving horizontally? Which direction is it moving, right? If we only have one orbit, if we only look in one direction, we cannot separate that. We do not know if the motion we are measuring is it going down or is it moving to the side. So if we have only one measurement, we have this line of sight deformation. Let me use another color. Okay, so if we have a measurement, deformation going down, right, that would give a certain phase component in the line of sight direction. Right? If we have a motion toward east, that would also give a component in that line of sight direction, and we can't actually separate them. We wouldn't really know if it's going down or if it's going eastward, just from one direction, because we only measure that part of the motion, only that component of it. It's different if you have two measurements. If you have ascending and descending, for example, then we're going to have two measurements with two different line of sight directions, right? And then we can solve that issue. Then we can separate the motion directions and separate between vertical and horizontal motion, and we can also form a 3D motion vector. Right. One issue with that is, so you see we have our satellites going ascending, descending. So basically they go more or less like this 10-degree difference, they go north to south. Right? So our measurement direction is typically perpendicular to that, so more or less east to west. Okay? So we are ending up being able to measure vertical motion and horizontal motion, which is basically east and west direction, while we have not a good angle toward motion in the direction that is in the direction of the satellite parts, and more or less north or south directed motions. The interferometry with the typical satellite configuration is much less sensitive to that, right? Because we are not really north-south direct, we have that 10-degree difference, and the difference is different for ascending and descending. So you may still be able to see also more north and south moving motions, but you're less sensitive to it. So that means the motion must be much larger for you to recognize it. So that is another issue coming from that. Okay, let's see, what is the next slide? That's an example here from Napoli with ascending and descending vectors, and we see a bit different motion depending on the from which direction you're looking, and I will explain that a bit more in detail later, but basically if you are from both directions, if you see from both directions the formation, the motion is going away from the satellite. You have that from both directions, and you are subsiding, which is the case here. You see they are generally both red or reddish in area 1 and area 2. So looking from that side, you're going away from the sensor, and looking from that side, you're going away from the sensor. That basically means you're going down. Right? And this way you can separate the motion vectors, and you can separate vertical from horizontal motion. All right, let's take a stop here then, and let me ask now, do we have any questions? Stop sharing.
Yes, Professor, we have several questions.
Okay.
I will share. Then you can start. Can you see the screen?
Not yet, I think. Yes, now it's here. Now it's here. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's actually a good question. Right. Okay, so let me check the time. All right, not so much time. But anyway, the first one is a good one. So, if we co-register, if we have a long time series of images, okay, so we have images now covering several years, okay. So we take one image as the master image, okay. Now the difference between that image which we co-register to and the other image now can be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. That can be a very long time. And we still co-register them. That would be point number 1, right? And if lots of things are changing on the ground, that could actually become a problem. Now, in the case of Sentinel, we typically co-register them mostly based on the orbit, because now the orbit is very good, and then on the ESD, on the enhanced spectral diversity, which is not so sensitive to, if you have large changes on the ground, it's also sensitive. So you may run into a problem, right? Until now, most images that I saw, we still can co-register them very good even after several years. But if you would have a situation with large changes, that can become a problem, right? However, in terms of coherence, that's another story, right? Because we clearly lose coherence. Your
Con làm gì đấy ta?
deformation measurement or whatever you measure with that may more and more less relate, or you may find less and less points that are actually the same or stable over a very long time. So yes, that is
Con đừng có
a
ăn
problem,
ôm.
especially if we're talking about very, very long time, like something like 10 years or something like that of time series. We processed data of such long time series, and the core registration is typically not the problem, but the coherence and the changes on the ground and how many we still can, basically how many measurement points that are stable we still can process. That is an issue if we really talk about very long time series, and there is an issue here. Yes.
What happened?
Đọc ha. Dù.
Okay. So I think we are out of time. Let me answer the other questions next time.
Dù.
Okay.
Did. Park. Playground.
All right. Sishan sent me that. I will prepare them and try to answer them as good as I
Playground.
can. I saw I got again many questions. I do like that. Last time I was teaching online in another course. I get no questions at all, like none. That's actually what I don't like, okay? Because then you feel a little bit lost. I like getting questions and I like to help you, so come up and I try to answer them. If you're unhappy with my answer, you may also send me an email, okay? And I will try to help you more. All right. It's Friday evening for me, maybe Friday afternoon or morning for you. But I wish you all have a good weekend, okay? And see you on, next one is on Monday, right, Sishan? It's Monday, the next course.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay,
Next Monday.
okay. Right, I think last time I said it wrong. My next one is Monday. So see you all on Monday. And I hope it helps. And I hear you, and we have to also, Sishan, we have to discuss about the materials or something what we can provide. That's also a very good point.
Yeah.
So yes, there's also lots of material, and I will make slides for you at the end, towards the end of learning tools that are available online, and software tools and free data and free tools and more educational sources. Okay, there's lots of material available actually. So I will put it a bit together. There's really lots of stuff there. All right. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
So have a good night, a good day, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye, Professor. Bye, Professor. Thank you so much. Good day.
Thank you, Prof.
We have seen your cat as well.
Thank you for the lecture.
Yes, sorry, the cat likes to run in the picture always. He's always here when I teach. I don't know why. He likes me teaching.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Anyway, bye.
Bye-bye.
Xong chưa cô?
Rồi.
Thôi, chuẩn bị